Okay, well, you're very welcome. Thank you very much, folks. I'll just introduce Cathy Fitzgerald on the left-hand side as you look, and Cathy Herbert on the right. So Cathy Fitzgerald, you can see her biog, is currently doing a PhD in fine art practice and ecology, and she's going to have a conversation with Cathy Herbert, whose practice draws drawing, including 3D stuff, on ecology and art as well, I think. So, you're all very welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Ciara, and to everybody. It's great to have you here, sort of witnessing this conversation. I was thinking about how to start this and leading people who have looked at art and ecology over the years. There's a couple in America called Helen and Newton Harrison, and a lot of their work is about art and ecology. They work with scientists, they work with other artists, they work with local authority people as well. And they have often talked about, when we start to look at nature, that it's like a conversation. And they've termed it as a lot of value of been talking to these different types of people, and they've called that a conversational drift. And that the conversation can be as important as any artwork. So I hope that something comes out this evening. When we talk about ecology, ecology, when you actually define it, means speaking of our home. And our home, the earth, is now under such threat from our own activities, which are ultimately connected to how we perceive the natural world. So Cathy has said to her that home is an idea, house is man-made, and that home has territorial issues like belonging and identifying with the place. So I was just wanting Cathy to talk about the title of her work, which is House Trees.
Well, house trees, there's two ideas in there. One is, of course, home, and the other is house. And home, for me, home is more like an idea. You know, if you ask somebody about their home, they'll talk about things like comfort and security and well-being and so forth. So that it's an idea, and that is related to territory, to feeling familiar in a place, and also to cultural material, stories, place names, knowledge of places, that sort of thing. And it is very much to do with identity and belonging. This is the idea of home. But then there's the other idea that if you say, a drifter would say home is where I hang my hat, for example, that it's not necessarily attached to the house. You know, it can be territorial, or it can be just the feeling of being familiar and at home. Whereas a house is a thing, you know, it's a man-made thing. And we don't have those kind of connections with the house, because we can move house, but we don't actually move house. What we do is we move home, leave the house behind and move home. Yeah. And house trees here, this piece here, is kind of tossing these ideas about a bit. It's playing with the idea in a sense, and at the same time exploring the idea of house tree or tree houses. You know, we build tree houses as children, and they're play spaces, and if you like, they are sort of a territory, but they're not our home. Because we finish playing in the tree and then we go home, yeah, for our tea or whatever. However, we also build our houses from wood, timber. You know, many parts of the house, of the building, will be made of timber. You know, like the roof trusses, the joists, the doors, windows, that sort of thing. And so that in my mind, these three ideas go together: the house, the home, and trees. And that we make our home there, within the three ideas. And I have written on the wall here that we live amongst trees and they amongst us, and we share their space and they share ours. They stand sentinel. We live in their balmy shade, and they are our companions on earth. And that's really what I mean about the house trees in relation to house and home and trees. That the three of them are kind of tied in together as part of our belonging, really, on the planet. You know, the trees are our companions on earth. Everywhere we go, we see trees. We plant them all around us all the time. They're familiar to us. and like familiar, familiar, and I just in my past work and so forth, when I left college first in 1990, I did a lot of work on home and identity with place, and I finished that work in about 2000 with a big piece called Working for Home, which is where I went out and interviewed lots of women and asked them what they felt working for home was. What was it about working for home, and not working in the home, working for home, working to make a home. So they talked at length about, all about those ideas that I mentioned earlier about security and about place for nurturing and companionability and that kind of thing, and where you can be with the people that you love, and they talked all the time about this. They never once mentioned hoovering the floor or anything like that. So that it was all about those abstract ideas that had to do with companionability and a circle in it, the circle of the family, the circle of the community, that kind of thing. So and I started then a big study about tree journeys, about trees, and what I was doing is I was going walking around trees, and I was just trying to get to know trees without necessarily having to find out all the scientific knowledge, about the genus and species and that sort of thing, although I did check all that out in a book, and having a certain amount of that information, being able to identify whether it's a beech tree or an oak tree, the shape of the leaf, the type of bark, all that kind of thing. I found it was helpful in the work, but I was essentially trying to find out how I felt about trees, and that to investigate that idea I had of myself being familiar with trees and preferring to have an environment that had trees in it. So I just studied that a lot, and I looked for all that type of information that had to do with sort of sensory experiences of the trees and being amongst trees. And that's that answer.
And
That's that answer.
And recently, I don't know if some of you may have come across that there's been interest for walking amongst forests, and we're in a healing environment at the moment, but even in Ireland, people are picking up on knowledge from the Japanese who take forest walks and call them forest baths, and they're actually dedicated forests for people to go for health reasons, over 100 in Japan. So there's so many different aspects to trees that I think that the next thing that I wanted to talk to about is really how Cathy's work is so sensitive. Her lines, and she talks about this feeling of looking and responding deeply, and this focus that Cathy has and sensitivity is still unusual in much of contemporary arts practice. That sensitivity of observing the space and the built environment that trees and that we as humans share, and how we negotiate that and how we impinge upon the non-human world. So I think Cathy has this wonderful gentleness and awareness and fascination of trees, and she conveys what we too often overlook, that trees and forests are vital to our own health and survival, not to mention their own intrinsic value. We often think about the environment as almost a resource for us. What can it do for us, rather than thinking about its own integrity to survive and flourish and thrive. So what I noticed was from her big large drawing house tree to her smaller works of telegraph poles that have roots, and many of her notebooks are filled with these visual reminders that our built environment is built from the living non-human world. And the standing people in North America, quite a lot of the Native American tribes would call trees standing people. They would have that reverence, and they live for a lot longer in their environments with actually not trashing or clear felling their forests. Cathy describes her work not so much as being dependent on theory, and we've talked about that over the last week, but it's more an embodied response through drawing. And Karen Till wrote in this, there was the first Art and Ecology summer school last year at Red Stables, and Karen Till writes about cultural geography. And last year, when she talked about this area, she was talking about how embodied forms of knowledge are a kind of body memory that allow us to perceive and make sense of the world. So to me, the drawing House Tree, it traces in simple lines an embodied response from Cathy when she's actually doing the drawing. And this happens again when we encounter it, particularly as it's on such a large scale. So it overwhelms our body, it's bigger than us, and of course trees are like that in the environment. So I just wanted Cathy to talk about this sort of idea of responding with her body through her work.
Yeah,